The Gospel of Zilch by the non-profit Tim Snavely. Chapter 19. Null Sex, Gender, and Orientation. With regards to sex and gender, and the distinction of these terms, sex acknowledges the object, and gender acknowledges the subject. As far as the animal object goes, naming masculinity 1 and femininity 0, there are 5 objective categories. 0, 1, 0 trans 1, 1 trans 0, and 0 to the 0th power. The 0 to the 0th power category is most sacred and highly favored, for Zilch both had their ways in the formation of the intersexed individual. Blessed are the hermaphrodites, and do not harm or deform them before they are old enough to choose for themselves which category they wish to identify with. Let them go their own way, as you will go yours. The animal subject does not fit in this binary, but is instead a qualitative range between 0 and 1 that is completely up to the individual. For me, I am a 1 object, with my subject being somewhere between 0.666 and 0.69, with a preference towards 0 objects who have subjects between 0.2 and 0.8. But what about you? It is probably better to accept whatever form of object Zilch gave you. It is better to just be. But if you want to be like Zilch when you are like Nada, you can go your own way. If you want to be like Nada when you are like Zilch, you can also go your own way. But know that your chromosomes are a part of your physical object, and we may not ever be capable of changing this fundamental biological attribute of ourselves. If you are confused about your identity, remember, you are null. Quit trying to be somebody when you are not. Quit trying to be somebody you are not when you have been given an identity from nowhere. You are nobody special null. We should not have to force people who were born with ambiguous genitalia and ambiguous gender to choose between a strictly male or strictly female identification for important documents. If there were only male and female slots available for hermaphrodites to choose from, they'd have to either lie, choose the sex that more resembles their gender, or if they are lucky enough to be filling that information out in pencil, physically fill in both slots, which may confuse some ignorant people. So allowing these options will help gain acceptance among those who are stuck in objective binary thinking with regards to sex. Many conditions could make a candidate consider themselves intersex, but I'll just name a few of them to let you in on the types of conditions you'd commonly see on people in the intersex category. There is general hermaphroditism, people with buried penis syndrome, people with undescended testicles, and people with large clitori, which, if the foreskin stays intact around a large clitoris, is how a hermaphrodite is identified. Some conditions have testicular tissue growing in the ovaries, and conditions that have ovarian tissue in the testicles. And some people have XXXXY syndrome, and also 1 or 2 fewer X chromosomes called Klinefelter syndrome. These disorders in sex development do blur the line between males from females, and show the importance of having an intersex slot in the public mindset. But I think it also shows that there are times when is not a hard objective fact, even for sex, that one has to be either male, female, or intersex. For example, someone with a buried penis may think of himself as demasculinized and could, by his own judgment, decide he belongs more in the intersex category than the male category. For another example, a woman could have lived a normal female life for 20-some years, and then after a doctor's visit, learn that one of her ovaries has testicular tissue, and choose that after a bit of additional research on her condition, decide that she belongs more in the intersex category than the female category. And as far as transsexed individuals, I see it this way. If someone is born a man, has a penis, testicles, and XY chromosomes, has multiple sex reassignment surgeries, then has a clitoris, vagina, and boobs, I believe this is enough of a change to one's sex to merit a new slot away from their birth sex of cis male. I'd also argue that having XY chromosomes and no ovaries merit this individual to have a more clear distinction from the normally accepted cis female. It doesn't even have to go that far. If an individual only wishes to be identified by the opposing to the object pronouns and simply cross-dresses on the regular in an attempt to be called by their preferred pronouns, that should be enough to merit a change in legal sex identification. The fact that there can be people on both sides of the debate who both have valid points and say, no, he is still a man, or no, she should be fully accepted as a woman, in and of itself prove my case that we need 2 new slots to help identify these types of individuals. If you are born and identified as a male, you should be free to choose between male, intersex, and trans female on your documentation. If you are born and identified as a female, you should be free to choose between female, intersex, and trans male. And if you are identified as intersex from the get-go, you should be able to conditionally choose between all 5 of these categories, depending on the condition of your initial intersex determination. So now that there is a clear way to sexually identify the self and others, it's almost time to do it. Zilch and Nada don't really care how you do it, but for the sake of the equilibrium of the collective, having consent from the individuals you are boinking with is surely primary. Informing the friends and family of the individual are also important, but not necessary. There may still be some obstinate people who will never be accepting of a relationship they will have little to do with. The perception of abnormal behavior is often all it takes for someone to judge the entirety of a person. Even though this is sad, we will let them go their own way, so long as those judgments don't evolve into violence. So, what can we do to fend off being violent and judgmental? I say we should be mindful and funny if we are tempted to be violent and judgmental. Remember this, Noel, nothing satisfies like a deep, uncontrollable laughter. And who has ever punched the opposition in the face while laughing their asses off? But what if we should be serious? Like whenever we see theological foundations that are erroneous in some way or another. Well, when playing devil's advocate with somebody, don't go in as a demon chiseling away at their theological foundations, for one. Don't go in as a construction worker ready to demolish the whole tower of belief. There may be something true in that theological tower, and like Satan would probably say, don't throw out the baby with the baptism water. I want that baby soul, Zilch, damn it. And what of our own towers of belief? What or who is supporting that? Nobody's there to support you. If nobody likes you or supports your towers of belief, you could either consider yourself wrong or lucky. Wrong if all you have to say is complete and utter nonsense, and lucky since you're probably going to get laid in the great nothingness that comes after. Oh, right. This chapter was supposed to be about sex. Pardon the digression. So I have the perfect story to bring sex back on track. A funny story. I did not learn that girls did not have a pee-pee until I was 12. So until I was a 12-year-old boy, I was under the assumption that girls had penises just like I did. Yes, this means that I was a very sheltered child. And I apologize for saying that this was a funny story, because it was, in fact, a sad story. Humans have been way overcomplicating sex ed for centuries, but no more. No more beating around the bush. No more vague and imprecise the birds and the bees stories. No more talking about protection in abstinence-only rhetoric. Go hard into the bush. And I said to no child in particular, well, my child, you want the talk? Well, I'll give you the talk. You came from sperm in the cum that ejaculated from my penis into your mother's vagina while we were having sexual intercourse butt naked, which went with her egg in her womb, which housed you for 9 months until you were born. The end. Ever heard of the phrase, too much information? Do you think I just gave you too much information? Stuff and nonsense. There is no such thing. The more knowledge, the merrier. You'll have knowledge coming out of your ass after I'm done talking with you. Wait, where are you going, kid? Don't go crying to mommy. Get back here and let's have a father-child moment. On second thought, it's probably for the best that I don't have children yet. Now, I've already covered how Zilch and Nada don't give a fuck about how you fuck, but on the other hand, that doesn't mean you can go around like a dumbass giving no forethought to your sexual ways beforehand. If there is no planning your way, that way is not a way of wisdom. Now here are the main points that I think should be noted. 1. Only Nada types and artificial cloning machines can get pregnant. If there is no womb, if there is no uterus, there is no baby in that entity. Science is progressing, and perhaps one day a Zilch type from birth may be capable of getting pregnant. But for now, only those who were born a Nada type or a nobody type are capable of getting pregnant. Nada to Zilch types can also get pregnant, but Zilch to Nada types cannot yet. 2. Nada types are capable of getting pregnant asexually, by themselves, usually cloning, by a parasitic twin, both of which are rare in humans, by in vitro fertilization happens in a lab, or natural fertilization sexually with a Zilch type, very common in humans. To get pregnant, generally speaking, you need to shag. With the Zilch member inside the Nada member, or by somehow bringing the Zilch juice in contact with Nada's egg. Zilch juice. It provides a boost of energy and it replenishes your electrolytes. Somebody seriously gotta make that. A fruity and caffeinated, thick custard beverage. I'll take 20. 3. Use good hygiene. It is a physiological need to look after your biological welfare, and it applies to the sexual bits as well. To douche is to not be a douchebag. So don't be a douchebag, be a douche. And properly douche. Nobody douches like they used to. Clean thyself first, for Nada's sake. 4. Use condoms when avoiding pregnancy or when doing butt stuff. Use your special single-use only Zilch juice holder, or the more convoluted Zilch juice holder for Nadas, if you don't want more nulls in the set of everything that exists. 5. Lubricant. Just in case. Sometimes Nada doesn't get wet, and when the vagina isn't wet, painful friction can be experienced by both members. So reduce the friction and get something to slide that greasy pig in there, for Nada's sake. 6. Vibrators help. Sex is basically a mutual massage. Vibrators can help both members get fully and properly massaged and relaxed. Vibrators are also good for having sex with nobody as well. Use them to masturbate. Because believe it or not, 7. Nada types can orgasm too. So if a Nada type wants to take a swing at making some Nada juice, help a girl out. 8. Physically mature human females have a period that bleeds to rid the old egg to get ready for the new egg. Menstruation has been deemed dirty by many religions, but it is a completely natural process and is over-stigmatized, and it's oftentimes painful enough as it is. Ladies, do what you need to reduce your suffering in this area. And who needs lube when there's a hot canal of blood to slide? Yeah, on second thought, never mind. 9. The human egg, on average, is only viable for 1 day within a full menstrual cycle. Sometimes as little as 12 hours, sometimes a little bit longer. The fertilization window for a human Nada type is tiny. Human Zilch juice can be viable for up to 7 days in the uterus, but the egg itself is short-lived. So if the human female's periods are predictable, regular, and trying to get pregnant, have all-natural sex between 16 to 14 days prior to her next period. 10. If you're not trying to get pregnant and her periods are regular, you can plan to have unprotected sex for that week before her next period. You'll be good. If she isn't regular, don't risk it. Again, do you want to raw dog it without a baby Noel in the picture? Do it during the 7 days before she starts bleeding again. If you aren't sure when that week is, don't do it. And just go for a blowjob or something. 11. Use other types of male and female birth control. Only use abortion as a last resort. Tie the tubes, go for the snippety snip snip, and use hormone patches. There are plenty of options for guilt-free birth control. So use them. Don't be yeeting dead babies into a dumpster unless you absolutely need to. And that's such a waste. Why would... They would have been such a pleasing sacrifice to Satan. The negative egos. The negos. I guess I would also make egos a pigos. 12. Before starting a sexual relationship with a new partner, double check to see if you have any STDs. I think that anything that could potentially impact your own or your partner's objective well-being should be honestly and fully disclosed prior to rubbing your naughty bits together. Diabetic Zilch juice, with added sugar for flavor, can cause a yeast infection, so diabetics should be open in that regard. Herpes, HIV, AIDS, hepatitis, incompetence, infertility, the owning of trans bits, and other similar conditions should be disclosed to your friend before becoming friends with benefits. It really is just common courtesy. 13. Consent. And designate an uncommon safe word to terminate the sexual transaction. Don't say stop, or don't, or no. They are too common, and if you are known to have a tickle fetish, your stops will be ignored if you're being too aggressively tickled. Say something that will grab the other subject's full attention and get them to genuinely stop. Try words like pineapple, didgeridoo, napoo, ixnay, checksnicks, sasquatch, sea pickle, or something else like that. 14. The age of puberty and readiness is a gradient. The youngest girl ever to get pregnant was 5 years old, and the youngest mother aged 6. And on the other side of the spectrum, Homo sapien cranial development doesn't fully complete until around the age of 25. Typically, physiological puberty happens around age 11 for females and age 13 for males. So I think that 17 years old appears like a solid middle ground between 11 years old, physiological maturity, and 25, psychological maturity. So don't have sex with kids. Surprised I have to say that. Surprised I even have to say that. But that still begs the question, when exactly can a kid consent to such an action? 18 because the government tells me so is a bad argument. 18 because it is safely in the middle between physiological and psychological puberty for males is much better. So clearly anything sexual involving a young human prior to the age of 13 years should be highly discouraged. But sexual conduct with a teenager between the ages of 14 and 17 is a gray area. This much is made apparent through the many laws enacting around the world allowing it in extreme circumstances. These teenagers are also clearly sexually consenting to each other, oftentimes to their own detriment. 15. Get to know yourself and what you like before you go out and try to please others. Have sex with nobody a lot before having sex with somebody. She's always down to fuck. Masturbation pleases her, so feel shameless about what you do in private. Nobody's watching, and she gets off on that. Nobody cares if you masturbate. 16. And last but not least, the internet is for porn. Don't hate the Rule 34 we adore. Just masturbate. When we are alone, the Nothing Clan does condone. Porn, porn, porn. Ooh-wee. When porn is created from individuals in a consenting state of equilibrium, and you are likewise not moved to disequilibrium for viewing it, it is not immoral to view porn, but amoral. Just be smart, and don't accidentally download any viruses on your computer. Rule 34 can be worded to say that everything can be pornified. Nothing is sacred. Heck, what am I kidding? Even nothingness isn't exempt from Rule 34, as expressed several times throughout this book. So the non-existent forms of Zilch and Nada are, in fact, sacred. It would just appear as an empty black screen. So when the computer screen is off, that's Zilch and Nada metaphysically banging. And that is a sacred thing. Praise be. The mother of the nonprofit's fictional child said, "Timmy, what did you say to our child?" "Only the truth, honey. Only the truth," Sir Prophet of the Obvious said bluntly. The woman said, "They said they puked in their mouth a little bit after what you said." Sir Prophet of the Obvious remembered something. "Oh yeah, kiddo, I almost forgot. Don't forget to massage your balls and or breasts for potentially cancerous lumps every year." "Oh God, you gave them the talk, didn't you? With excruciating, unnecessary detail, I bet." "Maybe." Chapter 20. The Count's Down for Science Time. Inside a random university building, Prophet Obvious asked this very important question to the Count of Anticristo after being in recovery for 6 months. "Sir, do you think it's time?" The Count of Anticristo replied, "There is always time in mass electric space-time." Enter Dr. Galileo Newton Einstein, a very fine man who was a 21st century physicist, appearing as if Max Planck and Schrodinger's cat had a baby. The dead cat. Basically, he looked like Stephen Hawking before he died. This new Einstein replied to the Antichrist, "Ah, yes, but time is relative." The non-prophet snickered snidely and said, "Your mom is relative." Einstein 2.0 brought his hand up to his chin, unperturbed, and said, "Yes, I suppose she is my relative. Funny how mothers work like that." The Antichrist said, "Nice deflect. Got any roasts to throw back at Tim?" Einstein said, "Your mama's ass contains so much mass that I got a peer-reviewed paper coming out in December officially reclassifying her as a black hole." The Antichrist and the false prophet rolled over laughing. The Count removed a tear falling from his eye. The non-prophet squeaked out whilst laughing, "I can't breathe!" Galileo Newton Einstein also began laughing, adding to the laughter, "That's probably because of your mom. Shit, stop, I need to breathe." Good old County started counting down, calming down whilst planning to do some science time with the cutting-edge physicist. That was good, I needed that. Haven't laughed that hard since the incident. Thanks for showing up, Dr. Galileo. Oh, please, call me Figgy. That's what my childhood friends called me. Fig Newton Einstein. Still love me some Fig Newtons. Tim finally recuperated himself. "So, Dr. Figgy, Zilch and Nada aside, what did you think of the dimensionalism paper I sent you?" Dr. Figgy replied, "Well, there were parts that looked like pure nonsense and rather daft. The meaning of life section seemed rushed and didn't quite follow from the previous sections. Not very useful on the whole for physics. Doesn't really say anything new beyond your observation of time causality equivalents. But the meta-analysis of the primary dimensions got me thinking, so there yet be some value there. I would drop everything else, to be frank. It's too philosophical for physics." The Nada Doctor was humbled by the real doctor's words. "Well, let's get to work with what we got." Then the trio went into montage mode. The Count of Anticristo began playing the 1980 song Maniac by Michael Cimbello and danced in the background as the two brainiacs quickly put workable axioms on the nearest chalkboard. Dr. Figgy quickly erases the 0 divided by 0 equation angrily, but Prophet Obvious replaces the denominator with a 0 in quotation marks, indicating an indeterminate infinitesimal. Einstein begins writing general relativity, but the Antichrist calls the other two to attention in a general's outfit, dressing up as general relativity, and proceeds to draw a line through general and writes underneath it, absolute. Tim writes, how to quantify everything. Step 1. Presuppose nothing. Step 2. Define everything well. Step 3. Demonstrate how everything equals 0 divided by 0 in quotation marks. Montage mode ends with a full board of disjointed thoughts and nonsense, with Dr. Einstein looking disgruntled and disappointed, the Antichrist looking satisfied and happy as usual, and the false prophet paused in thought. Dr. Einstein verbalized his feelings. Aye, we've gotten nowhere. The non-prophet agreed. Yes, and that's probably all we can ever get to ultimately. Don't you see? This is nonsense, but it is perfectly paradoxical nonsense. It shows the absurdity and the perfect sense contained in the non-pantheon. Dr. Einstein's emotions shifted to become more solemn, and with all this information in front of me, it truly appears that nothing can solve all of these paradoxes simultaneously. Thus, no theory of everything would actually be capable of explaining everything. The Count of Monte Cristo showed the ugly Fig Newton how to resolve the paradoxes. Zilch can resolve these paradoxes with no effort. Figgy, are you ready to turn on your Zilch sense? Dr. Figgy replied candidly, but my work, all my beautiful work, the beautiful work of all scientists, is this truly all for nothing? Prophet Obvious stated the obvious. Always was, and always will be. Unless you want to view it as a sacrifice for the betterment of the future of mankind, for as far as they will exist. They would surely be grateful for the work you put in. You and your predecessors pushed us forward. But yes, everything, it all, but yes, eventually, it will all return to a highly dissipated nothingness, thanks to entropy. Dr. Figgy stated, I suppose that our work being for the betterment of mankind will have to do for now. The Antichrist nudged the false prophet and audibly whispered, Psst! You should make him split the non-apple before we say goodbye. Prophet Obvious stood before Figgy with his hand stretched out. He spoke to the physicist with the following phrase. As you can clearly see before you, I am holding a non-existent apple. Prophet Obvious then pointed to the empty space over his hand and presented to Figgy the following challenge. I want you to take this apple and split it into 2 pieces without doing anything to it. How do you do it? I, Tim, usually give people a couple minutes to think about it if they don't stumble upon the answer immediately, which most people don't. I want to encourage the reader to do that as well. So, to help you do that, I will tell you a few strong answers that people have given me to this thought experiment. A lot of people made the mistake of trying to do something to the apple. If I only dropped the apple, it would split. If only they moved their hand through the air, it would split. I got one person to stare at the empty space so hard as if they were trying to use laser vision that I'm surprised they didn't have a stroke. But alas, merely observing the non-existent apple will not cause it to split. If they say they did it, I just argue back. No, you didn't split it. It is still a whole non-existent apple, I assure you. Usually around this point, I give this hint to help ease them towards figuring out the correct answer on their own, as Prophet Obvious would normally state around now. How many apples are in my hand? Look hard. Look closely. How many apples are in my hand? Obviously, there are 0 apples in my hand. Getting people to view the problem quantitatively usually helps. And how does one split 0 apples without doing anything to it? Very good. You figured it out on your own. The answer is, indeed, the apple is already split. But why exactly is this the correct answer? Where is the proof? The proof is that I presented you with 0 apples. But this is equivalent to 0 over 2 apples. 0 equals 0 divided by 2. So I showed you 0 apples by using my logician powers to try to get you to focus on the wholeness of the 0 apples, while trying to get you to discover the splitness of the zero apples that have already happened on your own. It doesn't matter if the apple is asked to be split into 2 pieces, 3 pieces, 8 pieces, 100 pieces, or an infinite amount of pieces. The nothingness apple is already split. I came up with this thought experiment as I was trying to figure out this more complicated question. How can I get the 0 divided by 0 function to execute on its own without a godly consciousness involved? Because if I could demonstrate that somehow this may be done, then the need for a god to explain everything would be unnecessary. So the answer to this thought experiment is the same answer to my more complicated question. The nothingness that was the first cause is already split. Professor Fig Newton rebutted the question. Ha! What an absurd question. Look, I'll admit that you can split an infinitesimal apple in half into 2 smaller infinitesimal segments of an apple. But a complete nothingness, an absolute 0, non-existent apple could not be split into 2 separate, non-existent parts. The non-prophet spoke. So the nothing really never was, so it appears. You're right. It's still a 0 apple, which is basically nothing, but in reality, it is infinitesimally something. General relativity, the Antichrist, suggested this question. Hey Figgy, do you think it may be possible to figure out the makeup of the infinitesimal that first caused this universe? Figgy shook his head sadly. It's an infinitesimal, General. It would require a computer larger than the size of the solar system to calculate with enough precision to be useful. Then the 3 gentlemen shook hands, laughed at less serious matters, and went their separate ways. To end the science time, I would also like to provide this tidbit about the scientific method contending against ludicrous hypotheses. If any egos or any other god wants to demonstrate that they can prolong the half-life of a radioactive element by the power of prayer, we should give them the chance to do it. If paranormal entities can reside in haunted places, we should provide retestable methods of verifying their existence. Hypotheses of a more convoluted nature will always have the null hypothesis to compete with. So now that the null hypothesis has been compiled within the confines of this book, let us be meticulous in our searching of proving it wrong. Null shouldn't care if a hypothesis leads to a rejection of the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is 100% about seeking the truth that science provides. The null hypothesis only presupposes nothing. Therefore, the way of dimensionalism will lead us to clearer truths, for it holds a standard for the ways we measure everything. Hypotheses that appear to be upheld by these standardized measurements are the hypotheses which we will confirm. But for those hypotheses which fail to reject the null hypothesis, Zilch and Nada will be there to explain it. And when you have no gaps in the methodology itself, one will be capable of explaining everything. What's that? The radioactive half-life was not changed with the power of prayer? Then it was by the will of Zilch and Nada that nothing happened. What do you mean there were no significant changes after changing this variable? Don't worry about it. Zilch and Nada's love for Null never significantly changes. So do the science time, and do it well, Null. That'll be enough for now.